1. Our family has an old summer house by the coast. The house itself was built in the late 1700s and was expanded a bit in the 1800s. A small one-story building with an attic. As a child, I could walk upright there. But when I became a teenager, I had to bend my head. The attic is just a big room containing clutter and stuff left by previous generations. At the very back of the attic, there is a small door leading to a tiny room. The room had a tiny window that cannot be opened, and most importantly, the fuse box. I remember when I was a kid in the 80s, we would be downstairs playing board games or watching TV, the entire family, and we would hear footsteps in the attic. Other times we would hear banging, knocking, or even the sound of someone sawing wood. My dad would always say not to worry, that it's just my great-great-grandfather, the man that built the house, a carpenter by trade. We went up several times to have a look, but the sounds would always stop, and we never saw anything. Getting older, I would go up there with my friends, and the sounds would still come at different times. Once a friend of mine had left during the night because he was too scared to be there anymore. I never found it scary, it was just the normal to me. Just one of the quirks of the old house. Fast forward a couple of years, a family that is friends with our family borrowed the place for a week. One night the husband and 2 children were out attending a concert while the wife stayed behind at the summer house. At one point during the night, the electricity went out, so she grabbed a flashlight and went up to the attic to change the fuse. When she got to the little door, it would not budge. The door opened into the little room, but now it was completely stuck. She panicked and ran outside, waiting on the steps for her family to get back. As soon as they returned, the husband and oldest son went up to the attic and had to remove the hinges to get the door off. Inside the little room, every piece of furniture and knick-knack inside was stacked up in front of the door. They packed their stuff and left that night, never stepping foot inside our summer house again. There has been a lot of renovation to the house in later years, and my sister and her husband live there now. They haven't heard anything in the last 2 years. 2. In the past 2 years, my life has changed drastically, and I'm no longer working where I used to work. Hence, I don't have new paranormal experiences on a daily basis. That's not to say I haven't had any at all in the past 2 years, but they've been very personal and I haven't wanted to share them quite yet. But this experience from when I was a kid, I just remembered it tonight, after not having thought about it for well over 20 years. When I was a kid, my parents had an old 70s Airstream trailer. It wasn't very big, but for a kid and his mom, while Dad was working over summer, it was cool for vacations and camping. Parked in a permanent spot in an RV park in the mountains. My mom had it fixed up with white paint, classy wallpaper with roses and pink carpet. My dad didn't care. He knew she'd doll it up and have fun with it, and it was intended to be her toy for when he was working out of town over the summer. For how small it was, we had a surprising amount of storage and room, and we could pack my 4 cousins in it too, so we had a lot of fun camping. One summer, when I was about 10, we went up camping and found we had a new neighbor in the spot behind us. The neighbor was an older lady in her 70s named Lil, whose husband had passed not but a month before we came up to camp for the summer. He simultaneously had a heart attack and an aneurysm rupture in his brain, dropping dead on the spot at their campsite. Lil was very nice, if a little eccentric. My mom thought she was a tad nuts but lovable, and she was always full of stories and good humor. Mom and I had her over for dinner several times, and she immediately became a part of the family. One day she invited me over to hang out and watch TV. For the 90s, she had a pretty big TV and her own satellite TV service in her RV. It wasn't big, but it was high-end and classy for what it was, and after her husband had passed, she called it home. Next to her TV, she kept a stuffed duck wearing a fishing hat and a utility vest. She said it was her husband's favorite stuffed toy, and they always took it with them on the road when they traveled before he passed. Having grown up in a home haunted by my great-grandfather, and being able to see ghosts in certain conditions, I was familiar with that hair standing up feeling in a spiritually active area, and I certainly got that immediately upon walking into her big rig. But it didn't feel threatening. It was just there, like a background hum. Being a kid and not yet experienced enough to realize what was going on, I blew it off and rolled with it. As soon as I walked through the door, I heard a quack sound. It didn't sound like it was coming from any particular place. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere. Like a sound in my head. Whenever I heard the quack, a strange line of distortion about an 1/8 high would run across the top of my TV screen, right in line with the beak on the duck doll. Just a single brief quack. It repeated and seemed very insistent about something. Lil looked toward the doll next to the TV and said, "Oh, shut up. He can hear you." But still the quacks persisted. After a moment, while getting me settled on the couch with fresh baked cookies and iced tea, she told me with no context and a bit exasperated, "He's saying hello to you. He won't stop until you say hello back." I wasn't exactly sure who he was. There wasn't anyone else here, and she hadn't told me the history of the duck yet. But I rolled with it and reluctantly said, "Hello?" Immediately, the quacking stopped. The silence didn't last, though, and started again when she changed the channel, turning the TV to some cartoons on the channel we couldn't get over the park satellite TV at our trailer. Immediately, there was a quack, and the channel changed to a football game. She grumbled something under her breath, changing it back to the cartoons, only for there to be another quack, and the channel changed right back to the same ball game. "Now you stop it. He's our guest, and I promised he could watch cartoons. So stop changing the channel." She changed it back to the cartoons, and this time it stayed on cartoons for a while. Having set me up, she then told me if I needed anything to holler and promptly went out the front to hang out with Mom. Sitting there opposite the TV, loaded with iced tea and cookies, I couldn't really concentrate on the TV for the uneasy feeling I was getting. Today, I know what that feeling means, but at 10 years old, all I knew was something felt off, and it felt like I wasn't alone. After a while, there was a quack and the TV changed back to the ball game. My eyes got big like saucers, and I started to get scared because I knew I hadn't changed the channel, and Lil was outside and couldn't have changed it. Just as I started to get freaked out, there was another quack and the channel changed back to cartoons. Like it conceded that it was freaking me out and was feeling guilty about it. Occasionally, I heard the quack repeat. Channel changed back and forth a few more times, but it eventually stopped. When it was time for me to go into town with my mom, Lil came to get me and take me home. About a 20-foot walk between the front doors, if that. And I asked her if she had been changing the channel from outside. She said no. I told her that the channel changed a couple times by itself, back and forth from cartoons to the ball game. On cue, there was a quack, and the channel changed to the ball game. There, look. Did you see the line through the TV when it quacked? She said yes, and commenced to tell me about the duck and that she believed it was her deceased husband making the duck quack. I very obviously wasn't buying it. I had no poker face. That a stuffed duck was quacking on its own and changing the channel, and thought I was being tricked, so she picked it up, turned it over, and said, "See?" pulling out a couple of bare wires from where the battery compartment should be in the butt of the doll. I didn't believe it myself, so I ripped out the wires thinking it'd stop. But that didn't do no good. Now I know my husband makes it quack when he wants me to know he's here, and I don't feel lonely no more knowing I'm not alone and he still loves me. On cue, the duck quacked in her hands, and a line of distortion went through the TV again. And she clearly saw it this time, pointing out, "That's some awesome and mighty power making this duck quack. And that much power does funny things when it's close to technology." Having experienced lights turning on and off on their own, TVs turning on and off, channels changing, doors opening and closing, etc. at home, I started to understand what was happening. On the way into town, I excitedly told Mom about the duck, and she didn't believe me, of course. Most normal people automatically disbelieve anything about the strange and unusual, unless you're a bit strange and unusual yourself and experience weird stuff on a regular basis like me. Mom would get spooked, though, still does, and deny anything paranormal was occurring. The next time we planned for Lil to come over for dinner, I begged for her to bring the duck. She did, set it on the bench at our dining table like it was her dinner partner, and right on cue, with my mom watching and paying attention, the duck quacked. Needless to say, my mom just about crapped her pants, and sadly, poor Lil didn't come back for dinner again. She and Mom still talked and hung out a few times, but Mr. Duck's spooking Mom kinda did in any future dinner visits. A week after that, we went home. The next time we went back to go camping, Lil had moved. Speaking of the neighbors, we found out she got sick and her grown children, older than my mom at the time, were taking care of her. I never heard what happened to her after that, and frankly, I haven't thought about that lady once in almost 30 years. Until the memory of the duck suddenly came into my mind, and I decided to write about it and post it. 3. This happened back in 2016 to 2017. I was newly divorced and had my young child, and I had moved into my parents' duplex until I could get on my own 2 feet and find a place. Where my parents lived, and still live to this day, is somewhat country, but also not country. As in there are woods and fields, but they are sporadic and not clustered together to make this into a wrong turn reboot or anything like that. They have neighbors across the street and to the left of them, and also some minutes down the street there's a medium-sized neighborhood. Next to their duplex is a small patch of woods, and across the street is some farmland that ends up running into the farmer's cattle pen. So you can expect to see a deer here and there, rabbits, basically anything you'd find in a forest. The night I saw these things, I was coming home late from work, as I worked for lawyers in the city that was 15 minutes from my parents' house. I drive with low beams because I don't want to get accustomed to using high beams all the time. So I train my eyes to use the low beams so I won't need to use them so often. As I was sawing and turning into my parents' driveway, my low beam headlights passed over this thing for but a few seconds. It was the color of human flesh, white, cream, tan, whatever you want to call it, and I could see the pink in the crevices of the shoulders and elbows and knees. It had 6 legs that ended with these feet that were 3-toed, almost like a chameleon. The way the skin shifted and moved, it was so tight over the bones, like the skin was like a casing for whatever this thing was made of. It was so tight that I could see blue veins in the skin on the thing's body. I immediately stopped and backed up to try to catch it in my headlights again, thinking to myself, had I just seen what I think I saw? By the time I got my car positioned, it already slipped into the woods and out of sight. Pulling in again, I got this instinctual wave of panic, like prey that senses a predator. All I could think of while staring at the door to my parents' house was, whatever you do, don't let the lights go out. Don't let the lights go out. Don't let the lights go out. I couldn't sleep in my car as it didn't feel safe to be there, and I knew I'd have to go in to be safe. But thinking about leaving my car only caused that instinctual panic to heighten. There's only been a handful of times where my body instinctually let me know of danger, like when my now husband was cutting down a tree and the voice in my head said move, and that same instinctual feeling came over me. No sooner had I moved than the tree broke and came down directly in my path. Suffice to say, I trust my gut. Taking a deep breath, I took the keys out of the ignition and opened my door, and kept hitting the unlock button to keep the headlights on as I walked. And true to any panicked victim in a horror cliché, I could not find my house key. as I was fumbling and jingling with keys and making sure to unlock my crews to keep the lights on. I couldn't find my damn keys. The more I couldn't find them, the more panicked I became, and the more get-in-the-house-now feeling was coming over me. So in a move of desperation, I stopped trying to keep the lights on and figured I could find my key and hit the lights before anything happened. Sure enough, I was able to find my key, and as it slid into the door, at the exact same time the lights of my crews went out. Jingle. My heart stopped. The sound of my keys jingling had come from behind me. I turned to look, and there was this massive humanoid creature with its hand on my trunk, poised as if to pounce, leaning as if it was going to strike. The lights from our neighbor's garage barely illuminated it from what I could make out. This creature's skin was hardened or armored. It looked tough. It didn't have any hair, and it was all muscle and tough skin. Its head didn't have eyes or a nose, but indentations where they should have been. As I could see the shadows of its eye sockets in the faint light, and I saw the same dark gray or black skin, this thing had no mouth, not even an indentation of one. All I knew was that this was the thing that I should be afraid of, and I turned the lock with the handle and slammed the door and locked it. I have never seen these creatures again, and I still remember every detail. Has anyone seen these creatures too? 4. So there is an abandoned hospital and asylum. It sits out next to a new and functioning hospital in Williamsburg. It's been abandoned since the late 1900s. There were several fires, and the final building was rebuilt in 1985 by the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. My friends Tyler, Diana, and I decided that we wanted to go explore this abandoned asylum one night, after having a couple of drinks at the pub. Tyler had been there before with a few friends a couple times, and had mentioned that one time he refused to go in because something felt off. For a preface, I am a very spiritual person, a self-identified witch, and so is Diana. Tyler is a Christian, but a very open-minded person about paranormal encounters. The night before we decided to go out there, I had a vivid dream about going into a haunted hospital, and in my dream an EVP came through to tell me it was evil, and we were unwelcome. I didn't really think much about the dream until after our real experience there. So cut forward to around 2:30 a.m., we approached the building. As soon as we got to the parking lot, the energy in the car shifted. Diana and I were very uncomfortable, and had heaviness in our chests and shoulders. But we still wanted to go in and explore. To get to the entrance that was broken open by previous vandals and explorers, you have to walk into the woods, follow a very overgrown trail, and head to a brick wall about 6 foot tall. There's 2 chairs there to help boost you over the wall. We made it to the wall, but not without Diana having mentioned that she had felt something on her ankle grabbing at her. I was closest to the wall with Tyler and Diana behind me. She started to have second thoughts. She told us that she wanted to go back and wait for us in the car, and that something did not feel right to her. I was still interested in going in. We had driven an hour to get there, and I wanted to see inside. But Tyler started to pick up on Diana's vibe and agreed that tonight something was off, and that he was uneasy because he could see our breath. For reference, it was about 80 degrees that night. We should not have been seeing our breath. The breath we were seeing was similar to what you might see if it was 20 degrees outside. I climbed up in the chair and used my flashlight to peer over the wall, and went back and forth trying to see what was over the wall and where the entrance was. I scanned the yard and then back to the entrance in the distance. There was walls surrounding the door area, so the actual door was not visible. After scanning back and forth, I settled the flashlight back on the door wall, and I saw a gray, emaciated figure peering at me. I jumped off the chair and told them to run, As we were running back and forth through the trail, I was behind everyone, and I felt something scrape at my calf, like a hand wrapping around me. I lunged toward Tyler and told him to put me in front and that it had grabbed me. At this point, the two of them did not know what I had seen, only that I was extremely frightened. We continued out of the woods with Tyler occasionally looking behind him with his flashlight. We made it out to the front lawn of the building, and from this point, I don't remember much. I only know what I did based on Tyler and Diana telling me. According to them, I stopped and stared at the building for a good minute, almost disassociated. They kept telling me that we needed to leave. They said I looked back at the woods and started to walk back towards it, saying that I wanted to go back. I want to go back. I'm going back. I have to go back. Tyler grabbed my shoulders and started to push me toward the street, to which I was protesting, saying I needed to go back. He had almost gotten me to the street, to which I planted my feet and pushed all my weight against him, as if to go back. He shoved me onto the street and pushed me towards the car. Eventually, I came back to, and I remember everything from this point on. I started to feel angry. I was upset at them, and just a general irritated emotion filled my body. We got back to the car. When we got back home, I could tell I still wasn't right. Something was off. Diana left, but Tyler and I stayed in the car to talk. I grabbed a paper and pen and drew what I had seen. Tyler gasped and said that I'd seen what he saw when he kept looking back, and that it was crawling, following us, and that every time he looked back, it would cower away. He said when I stopped and wanted to go back in, the being was stood behind a tree at the entrance of the woods, as if it was beckoning me to come back. I immediately grabbed the paper and shredded it and tossed it out the door. The night ended with a cleansing and prayer, and I feel fine now. But I do think something is lingering. Any ideas or thoughts of this experience? I'm not sure what we saw. I don't know if it was a ghost, a spirit, a cryptid, or something that I've never heard of before. But it was extremely terrifying. 5. This is something that happened to me when I was a kid, and I just wanted to share the story since it stuck with me for so long. I was about 7 or 8 years old, can't recall exactly, but it was around that age. One weekend, I was visiting my grandparents, who at the time lived on the countryside. I'm from Bosnia, Europe. They were only about an hour's drive away, and we went there early in the morning. Their house is in a wooded area with a long, winding road leading up to each individual house, of which there weren't many, perhaps maybe 3 or 4 more. I knew the area well, since I went to visit almost every weekend. Besides going up to the houses, there is this one section of the road that leads directly into the woods, sort of a natural trail. Our car broke down exactly around that spot, flat tire. Since we were very close to where my grandparents live and my folks knew I was familiar with the area, they let me go for a walk while my dad fixed the tire. This was about 9 to 10 a.m. in the morning, so they weren't really afraid to let me run around a bit. Being the curious kid that I was, still am, I went for the forest trail, since the main dirt road wasn't very exciting. The trees were very tall and dense, so even during daytime it was kind of dark. I went up the forest trail a few hundred meters in until I came to a crossroads. Now, this was more than 20 years ago, but it left a lasting impression on me, so here is what I recall. In the middle of the crossroads, at the very point that the roads forked, there was a small cave, or opening of some sort. I went a bit closer, and I noticed what seemed like fireflies sparkling in the pitch-black hole. Not sure if fireflies even light up during the day, but that's how I remember it. Besides that, I just felt this presence, as if I wasn't alone there, as if the cavern was beckoning me to enter. And then I noticed what seemed like several pairs of smaller red eyes peering from the darkness. At this point, I was quite spooked, thinking it was an animal of some kind. and I decided not to go any further and just slowly back away. This is in Southeast Europe, so there aren't many dangerous animals around. Very rarely a wolf or a bear would be sighted, but usually not near human settlements. Nothing followed me, and I had no trouble getting back. I decided not to tell my parents about this since I figured they would be mad and wouldn't let me play unsupervised for the remainder of our visit. They decided to leave me with my grandparents and pick me up on Monday, while they went back during the afternoon. I'm very close with my grandmother. She and I are very alike, especially now as a grown-up. So I told her about the encounter I had. She kind of laughed it off, saying, "Honey, there is nothing there. I walk there every day." But I was adamant about what I saw, and she agreed we'd go for a walk together and visit the spot. It wasn't far from her house, and we arrived there that same afternoon. We got to the crossroads, and, like she said, there was nothing there. No burrow or cave. Just a flat spot where the crossroads meet. No traces of it being dug up or buried. Grandma even asked me, "Are you sure it was here?" And I replied yes. She didn't think much of it, chalking it off to childish imagination, but she told me not to venture out here on my own again. We continued our walk, and I just stopped mentioning that event from then on. But to this day, even after all these years, I still remember this quite vividly. I even find it strange I am able to recall the details, and of course, I know memories can become distorted over time, and that what we think we remember may not always be the full picture, since our minds love to fill in the blanks. But I just don't feel as if this is the case. I often contemplate what would have happened had I stepped closer, or worse, try to enter the dark cave. I've read about evil places and forests around the world, or places where time and space can become warped. People walking into what they describe as different timelines or alternate dimensions. Perhaps this was one of these places. My grandparents don't live there anymore. Grandpa had passed away when I was 16 years old, and my grandma moved to the city in the same building as me and my folks. We still own the house and land there, but I haven't been there since. My dad goes out there a few times a year just to check up on things and clean up a bit. According to him, the house and land have almost been consumed by vegetation. They cut the electricity and water so they wouldn't pay the bills. So it's not very convenient staying over. But I do plan on going there sometime, perhaps during my next time off, vacation from work. I really want to go back to that road, assuming it still exists, and just see if I feel anything. Now that I am an adult with an interest in the paranormal, I'm just so drawn to this memory. Has anyone else experienced something similar? Would love to hear some thoughts. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Paranormal Stories, episode 294. And thank you very much to everyone who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, if you could please boop the like button and share the video with a friend or family member. Right, no special shoutouts to do today, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is... Let's keep it on brand. Since it's a spoopy day, let's have a spoopy question. Best kind of horror movie in your opinion? No arguing, please, it is just opinions. I like a bit of everything, apart from the kind of torture-y kind of movies. I don't enjoy those. But generally creatures, slashers, ghosts, although I do love a good haunted house story, especially if it's an older type house. You know, like a big sprawling mansion with a bit of land attached to it. Those are always quite good. Not enough good ones in my opinion, but those are the ones that you can snuggle up in a cold winter's evening, some biscuits, cup of tea, and just let yourself be immersed in the atmosphere of the movie. But do let me know what you think. Feel free to mention specific movies if there's any you recommend. I'm always open to a decent recommendation. And I'll check the comments below to see what you think. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, Thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.